Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Sarah, Angus, Francesca, and all of the family, I'd like to welcome you all, along with those joining us via live stream, to the Mason Park Chapel as we gather for this funeral service to celebrate the life of Mr. Paul Leslie Blount-Greene. My name is Ben, and together with Phil and Mark, we are here to assist you wherever we can today. So if there is anything that we can do, please don't hesitate just to ask one of us. For those of you who are able to, there is an online memorial page set up for Paul, and here you are able to sign the online memorial book. Leave a message of condolence for the family if you wish, and there is also a link for anybody that would like to make a donation in memory of Paul to North East Health District Nurses and Palliative Care, which would be greatly appreciated. At the conclusion of the service here in the chapel, Paul will be taken on his final journey for private cremation. For those of you who have a mobile phone, can I please ask that you now either switch that onto silent mode or just simply turn it off. Leading us in our service today is Civil Celebrant Barbara Cruz, so again to you all, a very warm welcome.
Do not grieve for me, for now I am free. I could not stay another day to laugh or love, and I've now found peace at the end of the day. If my parting has left a void, then fill it with remembered joy. My love shared, a laugh, a kiss, no sorrow, only the sunshine of tomorrow. My life has been full, and I have savoured much. Family, good times, and a loved one's touch. Lift up your heart and share with me. Be happy for me, for now I am free. On behalf of the family of Paul Leslie Blount-Greene, I would like to welcome you all here today to mourn the loss and celebrate the life of a much-loved man, a son, brother, husband, father, work colleague, mentor, and a great friend to many. Each of you is here today because of the very close connection you have with Paul. And today we are here to remember him with love and reflect on the relationship that you each shared with him. We acknowledge the many family and friends who would have wished to join with us today, but are unable to do so, and the many family and friends who are joining with us from afar, and we acknowledge their love for Paul. Now, Paul would not want today to be formal and stuffy. He left instructions that this celebration of his life was to be simple, with the least amount of fuss to those organising it. What Paul did want, however, was for you all to share stories, cry a little, laugh a lot, and for you to know how much he loved you all. And I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank Sam Bailey for beginning today's service with that beautiful piece by Chopin, which was one of Paul's favourites. I'd now like to invite Paul's wife Sarah to come forward and light a candle in remembrance of Paul and his sisters, Carolyn and Janine. The lighting of the candle reminds us that their memory will burn brightly in the hearts and minds of those who love him. Life exists in the time span between birth and death, and life's significance lies in our experiences and our achievements in that lifespan. And I'd like to invite Paul's son Angus to share with us some of the stories of his father's life.
Paul Blount-Greene was a person who shied away from praise and celebrations of his achievements and milestones. During gatherings set aside for these times, he would dodge the spotlight, instead using the opportunity to make better use of an assembly of loved ones. He would revel in the simple joy he took in sharing their company. Turning his capable hand to a multitude of pursuits, Paul would excel. His quiet persistence and keen analytical mind led him to achieve a great many things in his life. And yet, not once did I ever hear him sing his own praises. Sharp as a whip, Paul was often ready with a rebuttal, ready to have the last word when it suited him. Well, Paul, I'm sorry, but there's no getting out of this one. Today it's our turn to say some final words. Born in Wangaratta on the 18th of the 2nd, 58, to parents Jean and Noel, Paul was brought into an environment that gave life to so many of his qualities. These foundational years saw him ensconced in a deeply loving and connected family, both immediate and with the Hill family just next door. Untold numbers of family gatherings characterised the life of the Greene family on the farm, and through this, Paul built his love of social interaction and gathering. Childhood on the farm also equipped Paul with interests and pleasures that he would pursue for the rest of his life. His natural affinity with animals was built here, forming bonds with his beloved dogs and, of course, horses. Farm life also sparked Paul's appetite for speed and adrenaline, which he sated by doing incredibly irresponsible things with cars, and most notably, motorbikes. It was these years that cemented Paul's love of being in the country. Whilst he loved life on the coast, Paul was never more at peace than when amongst the river flats or rolling pastures of Dockers Plains or North Wangaratta. Time on the land also taught Paul some of life's valuable lessons, like how to start a paddock basher with a flat battery, how to start said paddock basher when the battery was flat and the clutch was buggered, and finally, how to operate said paddock basher when the throttle cable snapped, meaning one of the inhabitants of the car needed to shift from the cabin to on top of the engine itself. Childhood on the farm at Dockers Plains was something that Paul referred to fondly. It very much shaped him. Although, as some of the scars on his body may attest to, it may have also misshapen him somewhat. Whilst at school, Paul decided that academic pursuits weren't necessarily his focus at that stage and elected to take his leave before finishing high school. Whilst there might not have been a stellar academic record left in Paul's wake, his legacy of that period did include being in a band with Nick Cave, church choir, and a mysterious case of exploding bins that seemed to follow him about. So, not altogether unsuccessful. Upon departing school, Paul tried his hand at a number of things, including beginning an apprenticeship in plastering, meeting his future wife, working as a lab technician in a mine in Tasmania, a shift north to spend some time in Queensland, and returning to Victoria, delivering sheepskins from Geelong to Melbourne. It was during his time in the sheepskin delivery game that Paul first found his way to some casual work in a small town called Wye River. This work developed into a more senior role at the Rookery Nook, with Paul spending about 3 years here full-time. This was sufficient time to realise that life as an employee wasn't for him, and his ambitious nature set his sights on becoming his own boss. After completing training in the noble art of plastic welding, Paul turned his focus to beginning his own enterprise. He identified Albury-Wodonga as an area crying out for a plastic welding entrepreneur sporting a dental therapist fiancé on their arm. Working together for the next 4 years, Paul and his now wife Sarah bought and paid off their first house in Albury. This was a feat made only slightly less impressive by the fact that avocado hadn't been invented yet. Through the late 70s and early 80s, Paul was also heavily engaged in another passion of his, racing motorbikes. A formidable rider, he enjoyed success on many different bikes over the years. He would relish the mental element of racing as much as the adrenaline. Dad would often regale me with stories about how he would exploit a new racer's inexperience by employing the odd sideways glance at their bike on the starting grid, causing them to miss the start. Whilst these tactics may have been questionable, I'm reliably informed that Paul had the skill on the bike more than to make up for them. In 1988, following the sale of their house and business in Albury, Wye River came calling again. Paul and Sarah moved to Wye River on a full-time basis to run the pub while Paul and Tess Brown took a 2-year break. Local residents were alerted to the arrival of their new publican by the exuberant entry of a loud Suzuki as it transited Separation Creek on its way to Wye River, doing so whilst remaining on the back wheel the entire way. Time in Wye was spent kneeboarding, never did graduate to standing, continuing to develop business smarts and forging friendships and bonds that would become lifelong. It was also during this period that Paul and Sarah became a trio, with my arrival in 1989. With the conclusion of this stint in Wye River, the time came to shift again, this time to Melbourne. Following earlier business and property pursuits, Paul decided to return to study, entering a property valuation degree at RMIT. This foray into academia would also be cut short, however, as an opportunity came up to buy the Vine Hotel at North Wangaratta. This decision meant moving to the family once more, resulting in a long tenure at the Vine, and whilst never a roaring commercial success, it offered the chance for the family to settle. After a few stints in rentals, Paul and Sarah purchased a block where the family home would be built. The arrival of Francesca at the end of 1992 meant the impetus was growing to build the family house. Paul's worsening addiction to horse riding and competing in eventing complicated this, and coupled with the Vine Hotel not exactly raking funds in, this created some difficulties in bankrolling the build. The solution was a simple one to Paul: move into the shed on the block, and use the horse truck as a bathroom. 9 months of character building followed as the house was built. When it was almost ready to move in, we did so. And so began life proper on what remains to this day the family property at North Wangaratta. The following years consisted of getting kids grown up, getting the business built enough to sell, and having a couple of grievous near-death accidents on horses. I might make light of these things, but they are a result of consistent, dedicated hard work by Paul and Sarah, but also the extended family. The operation of the Vine Hotel was truly a family affair, as Paul worked with Sarah, siblings Janine, Carolyn and Ted, and with considerable help from his parents Noel and Jean. The business was transformed from when the family bought it, and after a 13-year tenure, it was sold in 2003. This was timely, as it allowed Paul to have his second near-death horse accident at Wandon Park, unencumbered by the need to refill beer glasses for thirsty farmers. This still resulted in a stay in ICU at the Alfred for a couple of weeks and a several-month recovery in hospital. Breaking all his ribs, puncturing a lung, smashing his pelvis and breaking both collarbones is no mean feat. So naturally, Paul responded to this by getting marathon fit a few years later. This accident spelled the end of Dad's serious competition career on horses, but it didn't stop him returning to the scene of the accident to compete one more time, proving to himself that he could do it. The next few years saw Paul again shifting between a few different things, ranging from sales of a product for washing horses to some work on the factory floor at Dominance Industries, but then finally training to become an equine dentist. This was work that Paul particularly enjoyed, as he was able to travel and meet others in the horse sphere, but was also able to call the shots in terms of his working conditions. It was also the butt of many a joke of my friends asking which of my dentist parents I attended, the horse or the human. It was also handy as it enabled him to tie up a loose end in the form of several tons of rocks spread around the house that needed to be shaped by hand and laid one by one. After a process lasting several years, Paul completed this impressive task. It remains a sight to behold. This was a living that Paul enjoyed until 2006, when once again Wye River came calling. After considerable deliberation, Paul made the choice to move back to Wye and took the reins at the pub once more in November. The decision was made for us to remain in Wangaratta until my completion of Year 12 the following year. The separation was challenging for us all and resulted in a paradigm shift in Dad. The dog was now allowed inside. The following years were prosperous for Paul, which he put to use by making opportunities available to his family. This included Francesca going to boarding school, supporting me through tertiary education, and numerous family holidays which had largely been outside our reach in the years prior. Well, aside from a trip paid for by Dad installing a Coca-Cola machine at a factory site, which paid for, but that's a separate story. After a number of years of yet more hard work in Wye River, and a sometimes harmonious working relationship with his sister Carolyn, Paul began to look at what might come next. As my graduation from university was approaching, we thought it best to concoct a harebrained scheme. During my entire childhood, Dad had maintained that there was no way I was getting a motorbike licence, as they were too dangerous. While it had taken me until my early 20s to get around Dad's iron will, I finally thwarted him by suggesting that we go on a motorbike trip through some of the world's most dangerous countries. Naturally, he agreed it was a good idea. Departing in April 2013, tying this in with retiring from the pub, the next 9 months would indeed prove the most memorable of my life. It's hard to convey how at home Paul was on this journey. Travelling 40,000 kilometres and visiting 26 countries on the back of a motorbike is something that would daunt most people, but Paul was completely at ease. Whether it was hiding in a tent for the night in Russia, carrying a pillion passenger with an AK-47 in Pakistan, being threatened with arrest in Kyrgyzstan, or having babies thrust into his arms in basically every country, Paul relished every moment of the trip and charmed people the entire trip with his genuine love and interest in learning about what made them tick. Well, almost every country. Vomiting on a border guard whilst leaving India seemed an interesting way of farewelling them, but Dad to his own. Naturally, the trip couldn't just end with the triumphant and jubilant ride back up the driveway in Wangaratta. There had to be some drama to it. So Dad facilitated this by having his appendix burst as we were approaching Izmir in Turkey. Navigating the Turkish medical system was interesting, but it was made easy by the Turks' support and Dad's easygoing manner. This medical malady brought the trip to a premature end, as our insurance company saw us as high risk. Fortunately, Dad still managed to sneak in a recovery week on a yacht in Turkey before I returned to Australia. It's difficult to convey the impact that trip had on my relationship with Dad. Suffice to say, it's an experience that I will cherish most deeply as a memory of Dad. It was a period where Dad and I moved from being father-son to friends. Following our return from the trip, Dad returned to Wangaratta for some restless retirement, which he filled with involvement in horses once again, as well as volunteering, tending to the family house, and spending some valued time with his parents, still on the same family property at Dockers Plains. 2015 was a year that brought enormous heartache to Paul, with the loss of his sister Carolyn to cancer. The pair had shared a working relationship for many years, but more importantly, a deep bond. Much of Carolyn's time in care was spent in Paul and Sarah's house, with the two of them supporting her through much of her battle. Not finished with him yet, 2015 had yet another curveball, the bushfires in Wye River. Not being directly affected by property loss, Paul was able to throw his weight into the recovery of the community of Wye River. This was an indication of Paul's tremendous mental fortitude. Not being a fan of red tape or bureaucracy, Paul was never a committee for committee's sake person. Rather, he saw them as a conduit for delivering the best possible outcome for a community. As such, he was deeply involved and engaged in recovery efforts through his membership on the Wye River Community Resilience Committee, with his calm and measured approach adding significantly to the committee's success. Deeply passionate about the natural beauty of the coastline and giving people more opportunities to interface with it, Paul was also instrumental in the conception and planning of a walking track linking Separation Creek with Jamison River. The walk's completion brought him immense satisfaction, as did learning of its continuation from Wye River to Kennet River. Tragedy struck Paul's life once again in 2018 with the death of his sister Janine. As was his way, Dad put others before himself again, being more concerned about how this would affect his parents and family than himself. These losses in his life encouraged Paul to redouble his efforts in work, which culminated in the completion of a house built in Wye River and the brand new function space sitting proudly beside the Wye Beach Hotel today. These buildings are both products of Paul's triumphs over adversity, with both of them presenting significant challenges along the way. They were also in line with the grand plan of Dad's next big adventure, a sailing trip around the world. Sailing was something that Paul had enjoyed on so many occasions throughout his life, first getting a taste for it on Lake McCowan when crewing racing yachts as a teenager. This interest bubbled away beneath the surface, re-emerging in 2003 with the illustrious family trip to the Whitsundays on Anita Cay. Dad's passion for sailing slowly developed and culminated in many trips around the world, sailing in Greece, French Polynesia, and Turkey more than once. These holidays combined Paul's love with social interaction with his sense of adventure and love for nature, so it's no surprise that he derived great joy from them. As you know, Paul's diagnosis last year was to stand in the way of the big boat trip he was planning. What was never defeated, though, was his positive and optimistic nature, his calming influence, him often taking the reassuring of doctors who were delivering him bad news, or his indefatigable mental strength. He carried this with him until the last moment, when he passed away peacefully amongst his family in the house that he built. When I think of trying to sum Dad up, so many defining characteristics come to mind. His quiet, steely determination, his valuing of characters in others, his trusting nature, sometimes to his detriment, his lightning-fast retorts, his love of people, and his deep hatred of coriander. Paul's wisdom and considered approach to life have led him to be deeply respected by so many. The messages of condolences and support that I have received in the past week is evidence that I don't need to stand here extolling Paul's many virtues. What I can comfortably say, though, is that, Dad, you were and will remain the greatest inspiration I will ever know. Goodbye. I love you. I now just have a couple of words to deliver on behalf of Mum Sarah. I have never known another person like Paul. He wasn't a perfectionist, but when he decided to take something on, he gave it his all. His determination and willpower were formidable, ensuring that whatever he did do was highly successful, whether in the world of motorbikes, horses, or in business. The fact that he was so single-minded sometimes made him difficult to live with, as he naturally expected that everyone had the same drive, talent, and ability that he had. I learned so much from him. He has shaped me, and I would not be the person I am today had it not been for him. He will be sorely missed by so many.
I'd now like to invite Paul's daughter Francesca to share her memories of her father.
So today I have been asked to speak about memories with Dad, and over the last week or so I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and reflecting on it, but I keep coming to the same thought. How do I condense someone who has lived such a life full of adventure, fun and happiness into a couple of little memories? So instead I'm going to take a slightly different tact. I think Dad missed his calling, and I think he should have been a lawyer. Because let me tell you, the man could argue. Especially with a late teen daughter who thoroughly enjoyed testing his boundaries. He thought I was right. He thought he was right, and I knew that I was. We'd argue until blue in the face and furious at each other. Absolutely furious. We'd have to walk away, and we couldn't speak to each other for a couple of days sometimes. But as I got older, these arguments became discussions. They became the birthplace of dreams, ideas, and goals. They became an understanding. And eventually I realised it was Dad's way of redirecting me when he thought that I wasn't on the right path. So instead of remembering our verbal battles, I'll remember his want to help. I'll remember his want to see myself and everybody else that he cared about succeed. One of Dad's biggest passions in life was competitive horse riding, and that was probably where he and I spent most of our time together. It was probably where our strongest bond formed as well. But I think with Dad, he enjoyed it so much for the challenge of it all. He was always a little bit of a puzzle solver in a way, and he loved working out how horses ticked. It was kind of his niche, and he had this unrivaled ability to bring out the best in even the most average horse and person. It takes years to produce one horse to the top of its game, and it's a sport that requires certain attributes of a person. So remember him for his patience. Remember him for his strength, both physical and mental, to overcome his sustained injuries. But above all, remember him for his resilience. It's not easy to make it to the top and then start again right from the beginning. And he was also a blinkers-on kind of guy. Once he got an idea in his head, that was it. There was no redirecting until it was done. And he was like that in every aspect of his life, be it his family, his horses, and building his business. Work, family, and hobbies, all the same. So remember him for his laser focus and his determination throughout life. The point is, I don't want to stand here and talk about my memories with my dad. I want everybody to remember his attributes and take them with you throughout your life, because I'm sure that's exactly what Dad would want, for all of you to carry on and live life the way that he did, with strength, love, full of joy, and an unquenchable thirst for adventure. He wouldn't want us to sit here today and be sad, so enjoy him for what he was and remember him for his attributes that shaped everybody here in this room in some way, shape, or form.
I'd like to thank Sarah, Angus and Francesca for their very loving, very evocative and often humorous memories of Paul. Angus and Francesca, I know how difficult it was to stand and speak today, and I'm sure your father would have been very, very proud of you. Now, I'd just like to now invite a long-time family friend and fellow equestrian, Amy Ledger, to share her memories of her friend Paul.
Hello, my name's Amy Ledger and I live here in Wangaratta. I used to live around the corner just recently, until recently, from Paul and Sarah and their family for 13 years. So I've known the family for around 21 years. I first met Paul in about 1999. It's not long after I finished high school. We met through a horsey friend from Wangaratta, Elaine Fox, who's now Elaine Roble. And Paul and Elaine were quite the unlikely duo. Elaine was really rough around the edges. She was carefree, and Paul was very calculated and disciplined, but their friendship just somehow seemed to gel. There was always plenty of friendly competition, banter, laughs, and then I was somewhere in the middle looking up to them admirably. So when I first met Paul, I thought, gosh, this guy is good. He's so committed, he's disciplined, and he's just successful. This is on the horse front. You know, he always did the work behind the scenes. Francesca was just talking about his focus before, and I feel like I'm very much the same. Like, I took a lot away from that. You have to do the work behind the scenes, and he always did, and he always got the results. He was really well liked and he was respected. Everybody knew him. And something he always did at horse events was he was always involved with getting to know the committee, the organisers, and he always stopped to make connections with the horse riders and spectators, even just the organisers and the technical delegates and things. He was really helpful at events towards the riders as well. So I soon got an invite to tag along with Elaine and then Paul and his family, and I got to know and love the Greene family like my own. They were such a big part of my life when I was at the beginning of my horse riding journey, and I wasn't much good, but with Paul's help and Elaine's yelling from the sidelines, I soon became okay. And I didn't really have a choice, because if you can imagine Paul and Elaine trying to ride my horse for me from the sidelines, it was always quite the sight. And I'm sure he would have ridden my horse if I got off and let him. And I think I frustrated him. He was always yelling, "Ride like the wind, legs of steel," and I would be shitting myself, and he used to make me chant that, so I will actually never forget that. "Ride like the wind, legs of steel," and I'd be riding around, and then I'd duck off the side of the jump and I wouldn't go over it. We spent many weekends out eventing, chasing ribbons and clear rounds. We had successful weekends, all of us hoping to come home with a rug, Paul had a lot of rugs, and we had disaster weekends with rails down, eliminations, falls, cuts, bruises and hangovers. And we also had a major fail one weekend where the truck broke down on the way to Wandon and we got towed in with 6 horses on board, arriving at midnight, and we were quite the circus. We used to sit around eating and drinking, discussing our tests and our courses. We'd countlessly watch back the videos that Sarah would take, and it was such a family fun event and affair, and I will never forget these times. I'll also never forget the weekends that Paul competed at a really high level and he tipped his horse over the massive log fence and he fell down into the quarry. It was the scariest thing that I've ever seen, and breaking most ribs and bones in his body, and he never showed any sign of giving up for his love of training and competing still. It was not long after this, it was around 2005, when my husband Adrian died suddenly in a workplace accident, and Paul used to ring and invite me out to the home. He used to check in on me. We'd go to rally days for the Adult Riding Club. Paul would instruct. We'd have wonderful club days, and eventually he got me involved into the committee as well. Paul was a lifetime member of the Wangaratta Adult Horse Riding Club, and I was one of many, many club members that appreciated all the time and effort that Paul put into the club and its members. I learnt so much about myself in those times, and although I didn't realise it at the time, Paul and his family were a very big part of my own grieving process. They were very kind, loving and supportive. Oxley Recreation Reserve also held a very special place in Paul's heart. He spent years and hours of his time trying to see it developed as a major equestrian facility, and when it was repeatedly knocked back, he still did a wonderful job maintaining and preparing the grounds for many top-level events. We used to spend hours driving around the ground, fixing, building jumps, raking, trimming, painting, and he was so pleased this year to go to Oxley in March and watch his friends compete, including Elaine's daughter Hayley winning her event. Paul has so many close friends from his horse riding days that would have loved to have been here today to celebrate his life, and I am honoured to be representing them. In the later years, I watched Paul shift from his own needs to supporting those of Francesca and Angus and their passion for riding. And they had a brilliant teacher and supporter in their dad, and he was always so proud of you guys, in horses and in life. I visited Paul several times down at Wye River, and it was clear to see that he was very happy and he had a wonderful lifestyle down there. He loved the ocean, his health and fitness, the friendships and the connections he had at the pub and in Wye River, and you could see his passion for the community after the floods and fires went through. He walked me around town one day, so proud to show off the views and their new block, up and down the hills, and it was just no wonder that he was so fit. Paul was a selfless, kind, generous person who always gave so much of himself to others. A family man who lived for his horses, travel and his next adventure. A life well lived. I will always be grateful for the love, the kindness, the wonderful memories and experiences and the support that Paul and his family gave to me over the last 21 years. Sarah, Frankie and Angus, you have been in my thoughts. You are all amazing. You are strong and brave. The best advice that I ever heard about losing someone close to you is you never get over it and you never move on. You just slowly keep moving forward and they will always be with you. Rest in peace, PG. Ride like the wind with legs of steel.
Thank you, Amy, for sharing with us that very special bond that you had not just with Paul, but with his whole family. And I'd like to invite another long-time family friend and Wye River resident, Chris Hodgson, to share his memories of Paul.
As a friend of Paul's for over 30 years, I was privileged and petrified to say a few words today. Paul and I met some 32 years ago, I think, in Moy River. Paul was a country bloke that was into motorbikes and horses, and I was the Melbourne guy that just wanted to chase surf. So we had nothing in common, really. He employed me, and we bonded over much banter and many beers. He even talked me into buying a Volvo off him one day. Which leads me to a little story that may not be politically good these days, but anyway, I bought this Volvo off Paul and I paid him some money and I said, listen, can I give you the balance of the money when I sell my car to the wreckers in Geelong? Which he agreed to. So this day, another good friend of ours, Alan Howie, and myself set off to Geelong in my car to sell to the wreckers, and we were to meet Paul in Geelong to give him the balance of the money. I'll say Paul and Alan chose the place where we met because neither of them are here to defend themselves. But it was a bar where clothing was optional, and we proceeded to sit there and spend all the money on beer. Being it was Paul's car, I thought, no worries, I don't have to drive home. We walked out the front door of that establishment. Paul threw me the keys and he said, it's your car now, you've got to get us home. So the hour and a bit drive to Moy River probably took us 3 hours, I think, but we finally made it. Never to knock back a challenge, when Paul was in Moy River, as Angus alluded to, he took up surfing, or as Angus alluded to, it was kneeboarding. I used to have great joy in getting into Paul, in pointing out to him that kneeboarding is not surfing. Kneeboarding is like riding a Shetland pony or riding a Pee-wee 50. That was the only way I could get it across to him. All this time he threatened to take me on his motorbike, which, as Angus pointed out to, and I think I was there that day, I saw him go on one wheel from Separation Creek to Moy River. And he knew I was shit scared of motorbikes. There was no way he was going to get me on that motorbike, even though I knew that I was in safe hands. To this day, he never got me on that motorbike. But to Paul, true mates are true mates. And time, whether you see them or not, means nothing. Because when you catch up with them again, it's just like yesterday. And that's Paul Blount-Greene. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And again, thank you to everybody who has spoken today. Paul certainly had an amazing and an adventurous life, and I just can't wait to see the movie. It'll be streamed, though. We won't be at the cinema. I'd like to invite you all now to take a moment to reflect on Paul's life, and this will be followed by a tribute which has been very lovingly prepared by his family.
now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. My friend, I'll say it clear, I'll state my case, of which I'm certain. I've lived a life that's full. I traveled each and every highway and more, much more than this. I did it my way. Regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. I did what I had to do and saw it through without exemption. I planned each charted course, each careful step along the byway, and more, much more than this, I did it my way. Yes, there were times, I'm sure you knew, when I bit off more than I could chew. But through it all, when there was doubt, I ate it up and spit it out. I faced it all, and I stood tall and did it my way. I've loved, I've laughed and cried, I've had my fill, my share of losing, and now as tears subside, I find it all so amusing to think I did all that, and may I say, not in a shy way, oh no, not me. I did it my way. For what is a man? What has he got? If not himself, then he has not to say the things he truly feels, and not the words of one who kneels. The record shows I took the blows and did it my way. Yes, it was my way.
Thank you to Paul's family for sharing those wonderful memories. And I know that we've all heard My Way many, many times, but never has it seemed so appropriate and so fitting. I'd now like to invite Paul's son Angus to perform an a cappella version of Meet Me in the Middle of the Air. This beautiful song has special significance to Paul's family, as it was also performed at Carolyn's service in 2015.
I am your true shepherd. I will lead you there beside still waters. Come and meet me in the middle of the air. I will meet you in the middle of the air. I will lay you down in pastures green and fair. Every soul shall be restored. I will meet them in the middle of the air. Come and meet me in the middle of the air. Through the lonesome valley, my rod and staff you'll bear. Fear not death's dark shadow. Come and meet me in the middle of the air. I will meet you in the middle of the air. With oil I shall anoint you. A table I shall prepare. Your cup will runneth over. Come and meet me in the middle of the air. I will meet you in the middle of the air. In my house you'll dwell forever. You shall not want for care. Surely goodness and mercy will follow you. Come and meet me in the middle of the air. I will meet you in the middle of the air. Come and meet me in the middle of the air. I will meet you in the middle of the air.
Thank you, Angus. That was a very powerful and an incredibly beautiful moment. Thank you. Paul lived his life to the full with absolutely no regrets. And although he always carefully considered any risk, he was prepared to have a go at just about anything, and he tried many roles in his life. He channeled his entrepreneurial spirit into developing businesses in small local communities, which were always very important to him. Two areas featured very strongly in his life: the beautiful Wye River, where as the local publican he was an integral part of the community, and here in Wangaratta, where again, as the owner of the Vine Hotel, he played an important role in the fabric of this region. Paul loved the social aspect of his businesses being integrated into the community, and he received a huge amount of joy from the company of those around him. Paul had a great love of being outdoors and in the beautiful Australian bush. He loved the peace and solace, but also the opportunity to participate in so many outdoor activities. With Paul, an interest would turn into a hobby, then become an obsession, and then a sport. As we know, he loved motorbikes and once rode from Australia via Russia to Europe. And as we know, it was on the return journey that illness forced him to return home. and his partner on this incredible adventure was his son Angus, who has said that it was this journey that turned their relationship to that of friends. Paul was also an accomplished equestrian and has been riding for much of his life. And when he built his home, he made sure that there were paddocks and stables for his beloved horses, where he could care for them, and they became part of his extended family. Paul loved animals. His many dogs adored him, and although he protested that he didn't like the family cat, I suspect that it too managed to win him over. It must have brought Paul great comfort in the final weeks of his life to spend his time surrounded by his beloved animals and to be able to feel their unwavering and unquestioning love and gentleness. The most important thing in Paul's life, however, was his family. His parents, Jean and Noel, brothers Mark, Ted and Andrew, and sisters Carolyn and Janine. However, the person that supported Paul in all his businesses, sports and hobbies, who held everything together for him and made it possible for him to do the things that he did, who worked alongside him and cared for him tirelessly as his illness progressed, was his adored wife Sarah, to whom he had been married for over 35 years. Together they created a wonderful life and raised their two children, Angus and Francesca, who became people Paul could not only love, but be incredibly proud of. Paul's wish was to spend his final weeks at home, in the house that he built, with the people that he loved, gazing out at the beautiful bush around his property, and with his animals by his side. With the help of Dr. Matt Byrne, who assembled an incredible team to support the family and to coordinate Paul's care, they were able to fulfill this wish, for which the family are incredibly grateful. I have been asked to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Felicity Barker, Fiona from Palliative Care, and Di from District Nursing, and all of you, Paul's many friends, for the care and compassion that you have all shown to Paul and his family during this time. Francesca and Angus would also like to acknowledge their mother Sarah, who worked tirelessly to care for Paul and to make sure he knew how loved he was by all. Paul passed away gently, with grace and dignity, in his home, surrounded by the love of his family, on Thursday, the 16th of July, and he will be sadly missed and always loved. As we prepare to farewell Paul, I'd like to invite you all to come forward and place gum leaves collected from the river flats of Paul's family home, the home he built with his own hands and the place he loved most in the world. And we do this as a gesture of love and remembrance. This tribute will be accompanied by one of Paul's favourite pieces of music, which was Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 1 in C major, otherwise known as Paul's shower music, which was always played extremely loudly. And I'd ask that you please allow Paul's family to come forward first. As we prepare to farewell Paul, I'd just like to share some final words, and this is a reading from a book entitled Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Everyone must leave something behind when he dies, my poppy said. A child, or a book, or a painting, or a house or a wall built, or a pair of shoes made, or a garden planted. Something your hand touched in some way, so your soul has somewhere to go when you die. And when people look at that tree or that flower you planted, you were there. It doesn't matter what you do, he said, so long as you change something from the way it was before you touched it into something that's like you after you take your hands away. Family and friends, could I ask you all please to stand as we farewell Paul?